Good? Cool. So there's this story that Jesus told, and I really don't like it. And I don't mean that like I know you like it may be something that you think like, well, it's a bit. Like the whole thing is like it's leading to a point. And yes, it's leading to a point, but no, I really don't like the story. Um, this is kind of what it is. And I don't I thought, when I was younger, I thought like the more I studied the Bible and the more I learned, the less I'd have these things. Because when I was younger, when I was a teenager, there was all sorts of stuff in the Bible that bothered me. And I remember thinking like I'll get older and I'll learn more and I'll figure it all out and then there'll be those things that I don't that I don't like will go away. And what I learned was the opposite happened. The more I learned, the more the things that bothered me still bother me, and like now that I've learned more, I've just added to them. And I don't know if that's sacrilegious. I don't know if that's blasphemous. Like I don't know if I shouldn't say that out loud, but I also wouldn't be honest if I wasn't if I didn't just say like I don't like the story. So I can't just jump right into the story because I don't like it and I don't want to. So here's another story. Here's another story that is tangentially related to it. A couple weekends ago, it was Memorial Day weekend, and so after church, Stephanie and I decided to go camping. Scratch that. We went glamping in a yurt. You may not know what that is. If so, I mean, good probably. A yurt is like a really fancy like hotel room / tent. Like it's really fancy. Like there's like a cushy bed and there's electricity and there's like ours had air conditioning and we had those like fridge in it and a microwave and a toaster and like essentially all the things you wouldn't have when you were camping like a real person you have if you're camping in a yurt. If you're glamping in a yurt. And it's sort of like camping except the opposite of camping, which makes it camping for people who hate camping. And that is me. It's me. I don't want to camp. Like, it's uncomfortable. Like, you get in a tent and, like, the ground is all hard and there's bugs and it's hot and it's just terrible. I don't know why you guys do this. So, I don't like camping, but glamping in a yurt is fine. Like, it's still not great. There was a porta potty. I didn't love that. I actually didn't use the porta potty once. We drove a half an hour to a Walmart for 2.5 days so I could use the restroom. That's how much I don't like camping. And I ended up buying, like the third day, I ended up buying something from that Walmart just to like smooth things over with them. I was like, should probably make a purchase. So I did. It was a Star Wars action figure, a little Ewok. Anyway. So that was what we did. So this is where we're going. We're down in southern Missouri. There's like no cell service, and it's a whole thing. And I asked Stephanie what we were doing, and she's like, "Oh, we're just gonna go to a bunch of places we've never been before." And when I hear going to places we've never been before, what I hear is, "Yeah, but so what am I supposed to wear? Like, what do I do with that? Like, is it gonna be cold? Is it gonna be hot? Am I gonna get wet? Is it gonna be, like, what do I do? Do I wear shoes? Can I wear flip flops? I don't like wearing shoes. Can I wear flip flops? Can I, do I wear shorts? Do I wear pants?" And Stephanie, she was like, "Man, I don't know. I've never been there. That's the whole point." So as we were sort of planning the trip out, I decided the only sensible thing to do was just pack as if we were going to be gone for like a week and just throw all this stuff in a duffel bag. And that way I'd be prepared for anything. So I took for a 2 nights and like 2.5 day trip, I took 5 pairs of underwear. I took 4 t-shirts. I took 3 pairs of shoes. I took 2 hoodies in May. I took a partridge in a pear tree. I took just like all the clothes I could take. Like I was good for like the Oregon Trail, right? Like it was going to be, I had so many clothes and I just, I thought, man, this is what adults do. I'm almost 40 now. This is what adults do. They prepare for things. They pack more things than are necessary. And so we go and we drive down there, and so we get there, and it's like dusk when we get there or so, and we get there and like we see the yurt, like this big tent looking thing, and like elevated on a thing, and we had taken our dogs with us. It was going to be a whole dog adventure, and my dogs are fancy, like they're just like me, like they don't want to go camping either, like they can't even shed. Like they have to be groomed, guys. Like our dogs are abominations of nature. Like they have to be groomed by a person. And so like they're not really like camping kind of dogs, but we decided to take them anyway. And so, we went and As usually goes, like, we get there, and Stephanie and I, you pair off. We got two dogs, so we pair off, and Charlie and I, he's bigger. He's a big, like, polar bear looking. What is he? Lab, golden doodle, yeah, golden doodle, whatever he is. And so I get him because he's reasonable. Stephanie gets Rosie, who is like a velociraptor. So she's no fun to handle, and so I give her to Stephanie because I'm a good husband. And so here you go, have that dog. And so we're kind of wandering around, and of course Charlie is like, "Oh man, this is a new area. We got to go look at everything." So if you can kind of picture it, like, we get out of the car, we haven't moved anything into the yurt yet. Like, we're just kind of wandering around, and Charlie's kind of sniffing around. He's marking and he's doing dog stuff. And we walk around the whole area, and there's like the campfire, and there's just all the stuff. And we see this like clearing in the woods, like this forest clearing, this magical fairyland of forest creatures. I think Tumnus is going to be back there or something. Somebody's going to get that reference online. So it's going to be, I think, like, the forest creatures back there. And Charlie is like, "Dude, we got to go back there." And I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely we do. We're glamping. Of course we check out what's going on in the magical forest land." And so we go in, and it was literally like the size of, like, 4 rows of chairs. Like, it was just this tiny little area. It was all cleared out, and we go in, and we kind of walk around, and he sniffs around and does his thing. We come back, and I'm like, "Oh, that was cool. That was, an excursion." And that is when I felt the mistake I had made. So I don't know how many there were. We've had lots of discussions. But roughly every tick that has ever lived in the state of Missouri was on Charlie and I. From, like, the waist down. All of them. Big ones, small ones, in-betweens, like, just so many. Like, I literally, like, I like hit my leg to, like, see what it was, and just a group of them just flew off. Like, I just, there were just so many. And I am not a camper, okay? I don't like the outdoors very well. I don't like ticks because I have sense. And I have all of these ticks on me, and they are everywhere. And somehow, in like 4 seconds, half of them are burrowed into me now. Somehow, already. And so we're able to, like, we spent literally the next, like, 45 minutes, otherwise known as the first 45 minutes of our trip, taking ticks off of me and the dog. While I freak out and say, "I want to go home now. I want to go home." So Stephanie made this mistake. I think she's like, "Drew, you're being dramatic." And she's like, "Fine, do you want to go home?" She did that, like, hollow threat thing that you do with children. And she's like, "Fine, do you want to go home?" And I'm like, "Yes, that is what I've been saying. I want to go home now." And we didn't go home, but Stephanie was kidding. It was a hollow threat. So we get rid of all the stuff, and then we built a small altar, and we prayed to God and offered a sacrifice that I would not be allergic to red meat afterwards, because I don't know what kind of ticks there are. I have no idea, but I read that on the news. That might be fake or not. I don't know, but you can't take a risk. So, after we've done all of that, finally the question becomes, well, what do I wear? Aha! I prepared for the Oregon Trail, guys. I changed everything, and we put my stuff in a bag, and if there were ticks on it, that's fine. I'm almost 40 years old. I made an adult decision, and it paid off. Felt really good about that. I was happy. So, anyway, I don't know that we're going to do that again, is the point. The trip was great. I just don't like ticks or the outdoors. Okay, so let's talk about Jesus now. So, Jesus told the story one day, and we're just gonna have to read it. It's important that we just read it because we need to get a full flavor of what he's saying here. Okay, this is what Jesus says in this parable in Luke chapter 12. It says, then he told them a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." Then he said, "I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all of my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and I'll say to myself, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." The end, almost. If that was the end of the story, it's not, but if that was the end of the story, if we just read that part and we just think about what the story is, that's a good story. This should be the parable of the responsible farmer. The parable of the man who planned for his retirement. The parable of the man who was going on a 2-day trip and he packed enough for a week. Responsible, kind, gracious, doing all the right stuff kind of a guy. We should, and have, I am sure, throughout time and space and history, we have taught in basic things like economics or whatever, that this is how people should live. We should plan for the future. We should think about tomorrow. We should not just think about today. We should not just be so focused, narrowly focused on right here and right now, that we miss that there is a future. We should be planning for the future. This man is responsible. And it's probably his responsibility that leads to his success. He had so much wheat and other crops that he tears down the barns that he had, which means he had enough before that he could fill those barns. But now he tears down those barns, builds bigger barns, and everything's great. Like, this guy is responsible. He is everything that we think people should be. And I'm not meaning that's like I'm not saying that just to pull the rug out from under him, though I'm about to. I'm saying that because if you tell a story about a guy who is successful and saves, and then he has a future where he can relax, that is called the American dream. And it's not just the American dream, that's called being a person. People want to be able to save enough to be good for the rest of their lives. And he did it. And he didn't do it by anything in the story, by being irresponsible, by stealing. We don't see him, we don't see anywhere where like he's being, overly greedy and taking from anybody. We don't see any of that. He is a farmer who does his job and saves his crops. That's it. So this is the end of that story. This is what he says next, okay? It says, "But God said to him, 'You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?' Yep, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." Okay, so that's not good. I don't like this story, though maybe not for the reasons that you could be thinking. You see, here's the general, usual, traditional interpretation of this passage. The general, usual, traditional interpretation of this passage goes a little something like this. This guy was greedy and therefore set aside everything to the detriment of his relationship with God. And therefore, he is a fool because he built up these barns and he saved all this stuff instead of doing something for God. Other times, people might look at this and simply talk about how he's a fool because he's rich. And these interpretations make some degree of sense. Okay? Jesus is, after all, the guy who talks about, like, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for, a rich person into the kingdom of heaven. Like, Jesus did say that. So Jesus does critique rich people, and we do need to deal with that at a certain point in our theology and in our relationship with God and the scriptures and Jesus and our Christianity. We need to deal with that. Absolutely. And so it does make sense, and so we can kind of imagine this guy's this, but here's what we need to understand, okay? I come from a family of farmers, and that doesn't mean, I know, the tick story, farming, I fell off the tree very far. But I do know this. If you don't have a barn to put your crops in, then all your crops are going to go bad. They're going to rot. They're going to be taken by animals. There's insects and bugs and, you can't just, what was this guy's option? Like, I build all this stuff and then I don't build a barn to house it? Then what? It just goes away? That's not good stewardship. That's being wasteful, right? Then we'd be criticizing him for something else. That doesn't seem fair. And even if he was, let's say in the story, he's this great guy who's going to share all of this stuff with everybody. Like, he's going to give it all to the poor. Guess what? He still has to build his barns. This idea that, him having the stuff is that makes it bad, it simply can't be in the story. We understand that adult people plan. adult people realize I don't know what's going on in this trip, so I'm going to take extra underwear and extra shirts and extra shoes because I don't know. Maybe my shoes get wet and I got to do something else. We understand that's an adult decision. That's what adult people do. If human beings for the last 200,000 years did not have that level of planning, you and I would not be sitting here because we'd have all been eaten by like bears and stuff. We like the ability to think reasonably, logically, plan ahead, all that stuff. The ability to do that makes us people. I'm bothered by this story. I am not bothered by this story based on the usual way of looking at things because, quite frankly, I think that's a little bit flawed. I'm bothered by this story because of a song that we sang this morning. So this morning, we're in our second week of our series called The Songs We Sing. And what we're doing is pretty simple. Whether you love singing, whether you hate singing, I don't know. We're going to sing at Ashland Christian Church. And so we are kind of taking a deeper dive, looking at the different songs that we sing, looking at different things like that and saying, okay, what can we learn? How can we think? And I, quite frankly, as bluntly as I can put it, when we sing songs in the future, I want you guys to attach it like, oh yeah, I remember we're singing this song. So like, we just sang Blessed Be Your Name. I remember that Job thing. I remember, last week we talked about how like nobody knows why we suffer, but we trust God anyway, right? Like, okay, like, got it. I want us to think about that. And this morning, I want us to think about something with Here I Am to Worship, which is probably my favorite song we sing. Probably. It's on the short list. Gun to my head, it's definitely my favorite. Maybe. Probably. This is the thing. I've got a whole lot of nostalgia with this song. For reasons that I will get into in a sermon during the series, I did not grow up liking singing. I did not grow up liking church music particularly. Church music was that awkward part I wish we could skip for me. I really didn't like it. And I'll tell that story here in, a week or two probably. But Here I Am to Worship was one of the first times that, I was in high school and we sang this song and I actually liked the song. I just liked the feel of it. I liked the melody. I liked the stuff. Like I said last week, I'm a sucker for a good bridge. This has got a killer bridge that I'll never know how much it cost. That it's a great bridge. That's such a good bridge. I also like that it starts with Light of the World. Jesus' best friend John. They're his closest disciple, at least according to John. After everybody else was dead when he was writing. So his best friend, Jesus' closest disciple, John, he refers to Jesus as the light of the world several times. That's kind of one of John's defining descriptions of Jesus. And we almost never talk about Jesus as the light of the world, and I think that we should. I mean, it's an amazing, beautiful, and that's probably what this sermon should have been about. Honestly, it's a really beautiful. Description of who Jesus is, what Jesus does, how we all are. But there is a part of the song that for years has always been the highlight. When I think of this song, I think of this song as the God became poor song. It's in that second verse. It's, all for love's sake, you became poor, that Jesus became poor. And what I love about that line, and what I've thought about since I was, 14 years old, 13, 12 years old, however long it's been. This is an old song. This is like Amazing Grace to me. I told you guys last week about the two different services. I never went to the hymn one, so I don't know the hymns very well. But so this one is this is the old song to me. This is essentially Drew's hymn. But 12, 13 years old, I remember thinking, man, it's an interesting concept that Jesus became poor. And over the years, I've preached sermon after sermon to you guys about Jesus being poor and what that means and how it impacts us. And there's a few different ways. So look, just off the top stuff, we should know it, but it's not what the sermon's about. Okay. So first, Jesus was literally poor. Just bluntly, physically, Jesus, the human person, was a poor person. We know this because when Jesus and his family, Jesus is born into a poor family. That Mary takes him to the temple. She presents him. In the Jewish law, when you present a child in the temple, a son in the temple, you have to make a sacrifice. You're supposed to take a lamb, is what you're supposed to do. But lambs are expensive. So for the people who are really, really poor, there's sort of a safety net, welfare plan. And nobody wants to do it. They all want to offer a lamb. If you can in any way afford a lamb, you want to, this is your child. You're presenting the temple to God. You want to give your best. Everybody wants the lamb. But if you can't afford it, you can have two birds. And sure enough, Mary offers 2 birds for Jesus. She didn't want to offer 2 birds for Jesus. She just, she didn't have it. She didn't have the money for anything else. Jesus was born into a family living in extreme poverty. And during his ministry, Jesus is a person living in extreme poverty. He describes himself as a homeless man. Like, he literally says, I don't have a home. Like, he says, I'm homeless. There's a couple of times during his ministry where money gets brought up. Somebody's asking about, like, the taxes to Caesar or the temple tax or whatever, and money gets brought up, and each time Jesus has no money on him. Like there's one time, like, he has to ask other guys, like, hey, can I see some money? I don't have it, but I want to show you something. And there's another time when he's like, well, I got to pay something. So he has a miracle with a coin and a fish. So he can pay it, because Jesus literally, like, he has to perform a miracle to get cash because he is holding nothing. Jesus was incredibly poor. And so that should teach us something. So it could be that the song is talking about that. It could be the song is thinking maybe more theologically. Maybe, in Philippians, we read that Jesus, even though he was God, he did not feel like it was worthwhile to hold on to his divine privileges, right? So he empties himself of his divine privileges, and he lives a life as a human being. But not just a human being, in fact. The Bible tells us in that passage that Jesus lives as a slave and dies as a criminal. So a slave, being somebody who literally has no rights whatsoever, is owned by someone else. You really can't get more poor or poorer than that. And Jesus died. I'm not sure you guys are aware of exactly how ancient justice worked, but if Jesus, wrote a check, he could have come off that cross. He didn't have money to do it. And also, like, there's the whole salvation of humankind and everything. But regardless, Jesus lives and dies as a poor person. He gives up everything. On a theological, spiritual level, Jesus gives up everything to live in spiritual human poverty, we could say. And that's an amazing, beautiful concept that we could talk about. Maybe that's what the song's talking about. I think another way that in the last couple of years, particularly for me, has been really at the forefront is the understanding that we live in a world where the poor among us are the least of these. Jesus talked about how he identified with the least of these in the world. That whatever we do to the least of these, we do to Christ. And in our world, being poor you're one of the least of these. Poor people are constantly taken advantage of. Poor people are constantly exploited. If you're poor, basically there's a predator around every corner. And maybe as a result of that, I think I was raised sort of with this idea, that a lot of times, no fault of anybody, but just try to show, teach whatever, that the last thing you want to be is poor. It's the last thing you want to be. It's almost like a moral failing if you turn out poor. It means you did something wrong. That's sort of the way the world operates. And by the way, none of that's true. If that were true, Jesus couldn't have been poor, right? So, like, some of these points are disproving the others, but we live in a world where being poor is the last thing anybody wants. The least of these are poor. But Jesus says he identifies with the least of these. He calls the least of these his brothers and sisters. He says, whatever you do to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you are doing to me directly. And that's, an amazing lesson to learn. And maybe that's what the song's referring to. I don't even know who wrote this song. I don't know what he or she was referring to. But over the years, I've thought about all these different ideas of what it means that Christ became poor. But I think at this point, maybe, if we've never considered it before, there's a level in which Christ became poor that is found in the story that we just talked about. A story that I've said I don't like, but I haven't really told you why I don't like it. Let me now tell you why I really don't like that story. It's not about the building of the barns. It's not that. It's not that at all. It's not about that. It's not about the guy being rich. It's not about any of that. I think sometimes we read a story or we read a parable and we assume we know the answer as to why something is, but we didn't read it. Stephanie, go back a slide. Go back to that Bible verse. Question: why does God say the man is a fool? Answer: you fool, you will die this very night. God calls the man a fool because his time is up. God calls the man a fool because he has no more years. He has no more months. He has no more weeks. He has no more days. He has a few hours, and then he's going to die. And that's what makes him a fool. Which, of course, begs the question, why is he a fool for that? And I'll tell you why. This man worked. He built his barns, and then he said, now that I have enough for years to come, I will live my life. I will eat, drink, and be merry. Now that I have enough in my head, now that what I've got is okay, now I can live my life. Now I will do the things I want to do. He's a fool because he wasted all the time he had to eat and drink and be merry. He wasted all of the time he had to live by planning for a future that did not exist. Which is to say this. This man is a fool because he believed he has food for years to come, which is another way of saying the man is a fool because he believed he had years to come. He believed he had next week. He believed he had next month. He believed he had 5 years from now. He believed that he had a future, and he did not. And you say, well, how is that foolish? How could he possibly know? Exactly. There's no way he possibly could have known. Because as it turns out, people, you and me, have no idea. Y'all could die this afternoon. And I don't mean that as a point in a sermon. I mean, literally, y'all could have you could have an aneurysm. You guys could have a heart attack. Y'all can get in a car accident. Do you have any idea how many things in this world can kill you? Y'all can die. It can happen. It's going to happen sometime. It could be today. I hope not. But if we live our lives as if we have all the time in the world to get to stuff, to forgive that person, to reconcile with this family member, to spend time with that friend, to do that thing with my husband or my wife, to tell my kids I truly love them, to go spend some time in a yurt. Well, you're a fool because you have no idea how much time you have. At the end of the day, this is the truth about human people. We do not have tomorrow. We do not possess tomorrow. We don't possess next month. We don't possess next year. We don't have 30 years from now. All we actually really have is now. That's it. We have this moment and this time and this space and these people. That's what we have. The man's a fool because he lived as if he had a future he did not know that he had. And I hate this story because me too. Man, do I do that all the time. Just constantly. I'll get to it sometime. Yeah, I know that it's not I know our relationship is really messed up. I will deal with that, I don't know, sometime later, next month. Don't make me text her now. Constantly. Over and over and over. You see, this parable talks about the rich fool, but this parable is actually saying, Drew, you're a fool because you live your life as if tomorrow is promised, because I do that constantly. all the time. And at the end of the day, this is what we've got. As Christians, we have now. As people, we have now. And you think, well, what what do we do? Like, what? Well, we have now, and then as Christians, we trust God with whatever tomorrow is. So that's what being a Christian so often is. That's the core of Christianity, is placing our unknown in God's hands. I don't know how long I have on in this world. I have no idea how long I have in this life. I will trust God with whatever tomorrows I have, and right now I will do my best to live my life the best way I know how. Because all I really have is now, and whatever is next, I trust God with. That's the way we are. And when I say it that way, we understand that people, all of us, are really rather poor. At the end of the day, if you don't even have Monday, what do you have? You know, we think about like all the possessions we have. You don't have any possessions. You're renting them. And so one day you die and then somebody else gets them. Unless they weren't worth giving to someone else, and then, I don't know, cool, you're renting trash? That's cool. Like, this is where we're at as people. We are all poor. We don't even have tomorrow. We have now. And as those who follow Christ, we trust God with everything else. What does it have to do with anything? This is what we read in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, about Jesus. So now, Jesus and the ones he makes holy have the same Father. That is why Jesus is not ashamed to call them his brothers and sisters. For he said to God, I will proclaim your name to my brothers and sisters. I will praise you among your assembled people. He also said, I will put my trust in him. That is, I and the children God has given me. All for love's sake, Christ became poor. Christ became us. Christ became a person who has now and nothing else. That's what Christ did. That is the love he has for us. He became poor. He became our brother. You became his brother or sister. He became us. And Christ, just like us, is backed into the corner as a person. All I have is now. So you know what Christ does? He trusts God. You want a theological concept that'll keep you up at night? Think about Jesus trusting God. Jesus trusts God because he has to. Because he became us. He became poor. He became someone who had a moment, a day, and nothing else. Now, this is really rather encouraging from a certain perspective of saying, well, Christ did this for us, and that's wonderful. That's beautiful. And it's encouraging as we live our lives to say, okay, well, how do we live our lives? What do? Well, we can follow Christ, who lived his life as someone who made the most of every moment, every day, as best he could, trusting in God, exactly what we are called to do, to make the most of every moment, every day, and trust in God. It's encouraging. But also, I don't love this. I don't love this because I don't like trusting anybody. I like doing it my own darn self. You trust people and then they let you down. I'd rather just be friends with people, not trust them. They can't let me down, and we can stay friends. And that goes double for God. I'd rather just, love God and worship God and have a relationship with God, but not trust him, because then if he lets me down, then I have to deal with that. I dare say the vast majority of former Christians are simply people who trusted God and then were let down and then didn't know what to do with it. I don't like that at all. I also am a person who will take a nap this afternoon. I like naps, especially on Sunday afternoons. It's great. You get on the couch, make the house a little cold, do all the blinds. Maybe knocks on the door, just pretend you don't exist. So good. I'm the king of being like, there is stuff to do around here. I will do that like Tuesday or next week. I don't know, 2027. I'm a fool who lives as if I have tomorrow. Look, I'm not saying let's be irresponsible. I'm not saying don't plan. I'm saying like there's all of this is part of our intellectual conversation with ourselves as we live our lives, right? Like I'm not saying don't have savings and don't like it's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we have to recognize we don't have tomorrow. If there's something that is pressing and important that you have to do, you may not get a second chance. And we got to understand that. And quite frankly, if it's not pressing, this guy says, "I'll eat, drink, and I will eat, drink, and be merry now." All this guy wanted to do was relax. I mean, it may well be that if you're pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, I'll relax someday. You may not get someday. You know? That eating and drinking and marrying, that may not happen. Eat and drink and be merry today. Do it this afternoon. Live your life now is the point. And of course, be responsible. Of course, but recognize we don't have tomorrow. This is all really rather difficult stuff. But the good news as Christians is that Christ became poor. He showed us the way. He gave us a path. And he helps us each and every day to the people who live the most of today, make the most of today, and trust God with every future that we have. This morning, we're in a second week of our series called Songs We Sing. As we talk about that one line in Here I Am Worship, we talk about what it means that Christ became poor. We learn a lesson about a story I really like. But that lesson is important to remind ourselves regularly, if not each and every day. Our second lesson from the songs that we sing is this. We only have today. So we make the most of it and trust God with all of our tomorrows as Christ did. We only have today, so we make the most of it and we trust God with all of our tomorrows as Christ did. Musicians are coming forward. We're going to sing a song. We offer an invitation each and every week. Take God up on his offer. The Bible teaches that when we want to do that, or to repent to be baptized. That sounds like two things. It's really just one. As we are repenting, that is a concept of changing, saying, I want to do things God's way. As we are baptized, it is a picture of us joining ourselves to Christ. If you've never made that decision, we've got a nice warm baptistry. All sorts of folks can do it. Let's talk. If you're already an immersed believer in Christ, you're looking for a perfect church song, this place is not it. But we do serve a perfect God. We want to connect. We want to call. We want to cultivate. We want to meet new people. We want to share the gospel. We want to grow up while we do it. And we want to make the most of each and every day, trusting God with whatever days we may or may not have in the future. As we stand,